Okay, so let's finish up with The Art of Loving chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 3. First question, what is capitalism? Fromm defines it as this way. Capitalistic society is based on the principle of political freedom on one hand and the market as the regulator of all economic, hence social relations on the other. The owner of capital can buy labor and command it to work for the profitable investment of his capital. The owner of labor must sell it to the capitalist under the existing market conditions unless he is to starve. This economic structure is reflected in the hierarchy of values. Capital commands labor, amass things that which is dead are of superior value to labor, to human powers, to that which is alive. Okay, so how do we lose our individuality in capitalism? Fromm states, modern capitalism needs men who cooperate smoothly and in large numbers, who want to consume more and more, and whose tastes are standardized and can be easily influenced and anticipated. How can a person keep his or her personality in such a standardized way? We become robots, or automatons, as Fromm calls people in the system. How does capitalism affect our ability to love? Well, can robots love? Fromm says human relations are essentially those of alienated automatons, each basing his security on staying close to the herd and not being different in thought, feeling, or action. While everybody tries to be as close as possible to the rest, everyone remains utterly alone, pervaded by the deep sense of insecurity, anxiety, and guilt, which always results when human separateness cannot be overcome. Also, this goes back to his idea of love of an object and how we see people as objects to buy and not as humans to love. What is the routine of amusement and how does it affect love? Fromm states it well. Man's happiness today consists in having fun. Having fun lies in the satisfaction of consuming and taking in commodities, sights, food, drinks, cigarettes, people, lectures, books, movies. All are consumed, swallowed. The world is one great big object for our appetite. A big apple, a big bottle, a big breast. We are the sucklers, the eternally expected ones, the hopeful ones, and the eternally disappointed ones. Our routines are passive. We take in things like a child. We are not actively creating or loving. Does love come from sexual desire or vice versa? Well, Fromm disagrees with Freud, who believed love was a side effect of the sex drive. Fromm believes love is not the result of adequate sexual satisfaction, but sexual happiness. Even the knowledge of the so-called sexual technique is the result of love. Fromm thinks that if people solve their problems with love, then they wouldn't have any sexual problems. I don't think I quite agree with it. With this, some of it actually is chemistry in the body. But if you want to write about sexuality, you should read all what he says here and comment on it yourself. Should marriage be like a team? Well, you see this is a very popular idea here, but Fromm sees this team idea as an outcome of capitalism, which everything runs smoothly for the sake of the product. He says, all this kind of relationship amounts to is the well-oiled relationship between two people who remain strangers all their lives, who never arrive at a sensual relationship, but who treat each other with courtesy and who attempt to make each other feel better. But this obviously isn't love or marriage for Fromm. What is a person like who is stuck in the mother-centered love or the father-centered love? According to Fromm, a person stuck in the mother-centered love frequently are quite affectionate and charming if they try to induce a woman to love them, and even after they have succeeded in this. But their relationship to the woman, as in fact to all people, remains superficial and irresponsible. Their aim is to be loved and not to love. Fromm's example of a politician is dead on, which reminds me of President Bill Clinton. Men in the father-centered love tend to remain aloof and distant. The woman is of no central significance to them. They usually have a slight contempt for her, often masked as the fatherly concern for a little girl. What is idolatrous love? Idolatrous love for Fromm is a person who tends to idolize the loved person. He is alienated from his own powers and projects them into the loved person, who is worshipped as the summum bonum, the bearer of all love, all light, all bliss. In this process, he deprives himself of all sense of strength, loses himself in the loved one instead of finding himself. Since usually no person can in the long run live up to the expectations of her or his idolatrous worshipper, disappointment is bound to occur, and as a remedy, a new idol is sought, sometimes in an unending circle. Perhaps you know someone like this, who falls in love often but has a new idol in a few months. What is sentimental love? There are two types. The first is a pop culture lover. Fromm believes all the unfulfilled desires for love, union, and closeness find their satisfaction in the consumption of these products. A man and a woman who in relation to their spouses are incapable of ever penetrating the wall of separateness are moved to tears when they participate in the happy or unhappy love story of the couple on the screen. The second type is when people glorify the past or the future. A couple may be deeply moved by memories of their past love, although when this was present no love was experienced, or the fantasies of their future love. How many engaged or newly married couples dream of their bliss of love to take place in the future, while at the very moment in which they live they are already beginning to be bored with each other? Okay. What are projective mechanisms that inhibit love? Well, if you know your psychology, it should be then you know about the projections when we put our shortcomings or hopes on other people. We do this as a nation when we criticize spell that right? Is that right? There we go. Other nations for invading countries without pretense, and other countries certainly do it to the United States. Sometimes people project on their children. Fromm states, in such cases the wish for children is primarily determined by projecting one's own problems of existence on that of the children. When a person feels that he has not been able to make sense of his own life, he tries to make sense of it in terms of the life of his children. Is love the absence of conflict? Fromm says no. He thinks real conflicts between two people, those which do not serve to cover up or to project, but which are experienced on the deep level of inner reality to which they belong, are not destructive. They lead to clarification. They produce a catharsis from which both persons emerge with more knowledge and more strength. But occasionally you will find people who do never ever fight, couples who don't fight, but they mysteriously just break up. How has capitalism affected our love of God? Our love of God is now seen as a deity that helps us make money and live comfortable lives instead of a spiritual search for knowledge. Fromm points out, some ministers recommend love of God in order to become successful. Make God your partner means to make God a partner in business rather than to become one with Him in love, justice, and truth. We can see this with mega churches, make that 2 words, that preach wealth and have fast food restaurants in the church like Subway. We also see this in the criticism Pope Francis has received for himself criticizing capitalism. Chapter 4. What are the practices needed for any art and why are they lacking in today's society? The first practice is discipline, and not just in a craft or hobby for one's whole life. But for one's whole life. However, Fromm says, modern man has exceedingly little self-discipline outside of the sphere of work. When he does not work, he wants to be lazy, to slouch, or to use a nicer word, to relax. This very wish for laziness is largely a reaction against the routinization of life. We view discipline with suspicion and almost see it as painful. Fromm states, it is essential, however, that discipline should not be practiced like a rule imposed on oneself from the outside, but that it becomes an expression of one's own will, that it is felt as pleasant, that one has slowly accustomed oneself to a kind of behavior which one would eventually miss if one stopped practicing it. The second practice is concentration, but this is rare in our culture. Fromm points out, you do many things at once. You read, listen to the radio, talk, smoke, eat, drink. You are the consumer with an open mouth, eager and ready to swallow everything, pictures, liquor, knowledge. This lack of concentration is clearly shown in our difficulty in being alone with ourselves. To sit still without talking, smoking, reading, drinking is impossible for most people. If you ever look at a bus stop, you will see people attached to their phones, but never just sitting there thinking. Since we lack concentration, we do not like to be alone. Think of Seneca's On Noise for these same problems. Fromm recommends meditation, something that is common now but rare when he wrote this book. Nonetheless, we still lack concentration. The third practice is patience. But again, we lack patience in our culture. Fromm believes our whole industrial system fosters the exact opposite, quickness. All our machines are designed for quickness. The car and airplane bring us quickly to our destination, and the quicker, the better. Modern man thinks he loses something, time, when he does not do things quickly, yet he does not know what to do with time he gains, except kill it. Now we have this even more so. How frustrated you get when something is downloading slowly. And when we do have time, We don't use it creatively. We just watch TV passively. Fromm also points out how important it is to have all three practices in our dealings with others. We should avoid poisonous people, of course, but we should also avoid zombies, people who are half asleep during their waking hours. However, Fromm points out, if one does not react in the expected way, that is, in cliches and trivialities, but directly and humanly, one will find that such people change their behavior, often helped by the surprise effect, by the shock of the unexpected, which is someone who's patient and listening and is involved. Plus, this has an added benefit of making someone naturally tired at night. Let's make that someone. Why is it important to be sensitive to oneself? Well, Fromm uses a great example of a car. You know when your car makes a weird noise and should be checked, but what about when you're sad or depressed? Fromm says the important thing is to be aware of them and not to rationalize them in 1,001 ways which this can be done. Furthermore, to be open to our own inner voice, which will tell us, often rather immediately, why we are anxious, depressed, or irritated. Though usually we just ignore it, right? What kind of teachers do we need? Well, Fromm argues for a mature, loving teacher, but, he says, we are losing that teaching which is the most important one for human development, the teaching which can only be given by the simple presence of a mature, loving person. Instead, we have celebrities. Quote, those are essentially in the public eye who give the average man a sense of vicarious satisfaction. Movie stars, radio entertainers, columnists, important business or government figures, these are the models for emulation. Their main qualification for this function is often that they have succeeded in making the news. We can easily point out Kim Kardashian and Paris Hilton, but also people like Steve Jobs are revered, or even President Obama can be seen as people to emulate, even though they lack Fromm's criteria. Fromm does point out that literature can help us, which I like, of course, being a literature teacher. Why do we need to think objectively? Fromm states, the opposite pole to narcissism is objectivity. It is the faculty to see people and things as they are, objectively, and to be able to separate this objective picture from a picture which is formed by one's desires and fears. We would like to think we are objective, but, Fromm points out, the insane person or the dreamer fails completely in having an objective view of the world outside. But all of us, more or less, are insane, or more or less asleep. All of us has an unobjective view of the world, one which is distorted by our narcissistic orientation. What is the difference between rational and irrational faith? Fromm believes, by irrational faith, I understand the belief in a person or an idea which is based on one's submission to an irrational authority. In contrast, rational faith is a conviction which is rooted in one's own experience of thought or feeling. He goes on to say, this faith is rooted in one's own experience, in the confidence in one's powers of thought and observation and judgment, while irrational faith is the acceptance of something as true only because an authority or the majority say so. Rational faith is rooted in independent conviction based upon one's own productive observing and thinking, in spite of the majority's opinion. How does Fromm define activity? He defines it as inner activity, not as someone being just actually active in something. He sees most people as being lazy about active thought and concern. He says, the paradoxical situation with a vast number of people today is that they are half asleep when awake and half awake when asleep, or when they want to sleep. To be fully awake is a condition for not being bored, or even boring. And indeed, not to be bored or boring is one of the main conditions for loving. To be active in thought, feeling, with one's eyes and ears throughout the day, to avoid inner laziness, be in the form of being receptive or hoarding or plain wasting one's time, is an indispensable condition of the practice and the art of loving. So, is the principle of love compatible with the principle of capitalism? Well, Fromm says no. The whole book has been one big no to that. Now it is up to you to find what small things can we change in our society. I'm not expecting you to come up with the answer to change it all, to end capitalism and bring back love. That's ridiculous. But what small thing can we change in our society that will help us love? And that's the art of loving.